This is the Afghan Tunisian knit stitch, but I've incorporated puffs within that knit stitch. And of course you can design your puffs in any arrangement you want, whether you want them columns, rows. I'm doing a diagonal or an alternating with so many rows of knit stitch in between. It's very simple to do. We're going to start out with a basic chain, and then normally you would work on your Afghan hook here, the long hook, but since I'm doing such a small sample, I'm going to use a plain crochet hook. And I've done my basic chain. I've looped. I usually like to work through the back loop so I can have a clean chain on the other edge. Something else that you'll notice is different. In my other video, I had added my extra loop before I came to the end. However, recently what I've been doing is adding that extra loop at this end to get this corner a little bit stronger. So normally you would add the loop on your second chain from the hook, but I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not skipping it. I'm adding loops in every chain. I'm not skipping one, I'm using that one. And that's because normally you would take off one loop and then 2 and 2. I don't. I do my cast off with yarn over through 2 loops consistently in each row. And the reason for that is some people can get a nice clean edge when they only do the one at the end. I have never found that to be true for myself. So by having those 2 loops at the end, it creates for me a nice chain, just as I have on this edge. So now I'm going to go through and do my knit stitch. And so we're going to skip this first bar here, and you'll notice that there is a V. There are the front bar and the back bar, and we're going to go in between those and pull up your loop. Now you just focus on skipping 2 bars. We skip 2 bars, go between that V, and that will help you, especially as you work up the panel, to be able to see what stitches you need to skip. So we've got the 2 bars there we're skipping, and we just work across the row doing that. And that's consistent as you work up your panel, and that will start to create that knit-looking piece of fabric. Okay, and as we're getting to the end, I've got my 2 stitches there that I'm skipping and putting in my last V-stitch. However, I have to remember now to go under those last 2 loops at the very end, so I have this nice clean chain, and I put it under there and pull up, and I'm going to begin having a nice clean chain up my non-dominant side. Another important thing is at this point, count your loops. It's important to remember how many loops you are working with, because it is very easy, especially after the puff row, to drop a stitch or add a stitch. So to be consistent, I've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11. I've got 11 on here, and I'm going to take it off, and now I'm going to put in a puff row. You can choose how many knit stitch rows you want to include to separate the puffs. I usually do 4 to 6, but you can make it more, you can make it less. So now I'm going to begin my knit stitch. I'm going to do 2 of them. Here's the edge. I'm going between those 2 bars, the V. I'm skipping the 2. And now I'm going to put my puff in. So I'm going to skip those 2 bars, and now in this space I'm going to do my puff, which is a yarn over, insert hook, pull up another loop, yarn over, insert, pull it up, and make sure you pull it up and give yourself plenty of room because you're going to need it. I'm doing 3, which means I'm going to have 6 loops on my hook. Depending on how thick your yarn is or how big you want your puff, you may do 3, you may do 4, 5, how many you want to do. I'm pulling my 3 loops. These are not part of the puff. And that will help me as I go through. Now I'm pulling up my puff, I'm doing my yarn over, and I'm twisting it so my hook is facing downward. And the reason for that is you want to be able to, let me pull this up a little bit more here. You want to be able to slide that hook through that puff. If you have the hook off to the front or the side, it's going to start catching loops, and it can get quite frustrating as you're trying to make your puffs. You finish off the puff with a slip stitch. Now I'm going to do, let's see, I think I'll just do 3. You can see the bars that I'm going to skip there. So I'm going to do 3 knit stitches in between my puff. Again, skip 2, skip 2, and I'm going to work a puff now, another one in this space. So again, it's the yarn over, pull it through what would have been my knit stitch space, and I'm going to do 2 and 3. And again, make sure, now I know I had done 4 knit stitches. Here's my 2 knit stitches, here's my 1 puff stitch, and here are my 4 knit stitches. So I want to keep those separate so I don't include them in the puff. So it's kind of important to know how many stitches. You can see the puff stitch. I should say 3. I did the 3. I've got my 3 loops here from the beginning. You can see here's my puff stitch, that slip stitch, and then I did the 3 knit stitches. So it's easy to count them once you look at your puff to know how many stitches you're leaving in between. Maybe 3, maybe 5, whatever it is. Now I'm making my puff, I'm pulling that up, twisting it over. Let me pull it up some more here. So I can slide it through, and I'm ending off my puff. And now I'm just going to finish off the row with the knit stitch. And again, you can see these 2 bars, and it's really important to remember that you've got those 2 bars to skip. And when I get to the end, again, it's just a matter of going under your 2 and pulling it off. And to end the row, I'm going my chain 2, and it may look a little loose on each side of your puff as I'm going off, but that space will be filled up with the next row, because you can see when I'm pulling it over here, it can look a little loose. And I'll finish off my row. And now I'm doing a knit stitch row, and these puffs aren't too big, but you still have to push them out to the front. And I'm going now back to my knit stitch, so I'm skipping the edge. I'm going into the next V, skipping 2, going into the next V, and when I get to my puff, I'm going to go under that slip stitch and pull up a loop. So you see it's starting to tighten the fabric up. And now I've got my bar there and my bar here, so those are the 2 I'm going to skip. And now I'm going in between. Again, skip those 2 bars, go in between, skip the 2 bars, go in between, and now I'm back at my puff, and I'm going to insert my hook under, which I didn't, insert my hook under that slip stitch to pull it up. Well, I guess I should have made these puffs a little puffier. Again, with this yarn, it probably would have been better to do 5 of the puffs. And again, I can see I've got my yarn here, my 2 bars, so I'm going between that next bar, and I'm getting to the end. How many do I have? 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. that's why it's really good to have a count, because I can see, oh yeah, if I hadn't done this one, I would have been short a loop, because I now still have to go under my last two. So I'm beginning to have my knit stitch with the puffs in between, and 2, 4, 6, 8, 11. I'm back with my 11 loops on the hook. So I'm ready to do my cast off. I'm doing the yarn over and pulling through 2 all the way across. If I wanted to do alternating puffs, I would have had to make sure, which I did here, I had 3 stitches in between. You must have an odd number, so my next puff, either in this row or how many knit rows I put in, would be going into that middle stitch. And now I'm just going to end off now, and to end off, continue working how many rows you had used at the beginning of the knit stitch, continue that to be along the top, and now to end off, I work as if I'm doing the stitch I'm working on. So I'm going to insert my hook as if I'm going to put a loop on there. Now I could do the slip stitch, but I tend to like to use a single crochet. So I'm ending off with a single crochet, but I'm still continuing where I skip the 2 bars and I insert it so my fabric will still have that knit stitch look to it. And you just work all the way across the row, inserting your hook in whatever pattern you're using. And then when I get to the very end, I have to remember to work in those last 2 loops so I finish off the row. So I don't, here we go in the last V-stitch, but I don't want to end off there. It'll make it cleaner if I go through my last 2 chains and make it a single crochet. And that way I will have a neat edging all around. And again, could have made those puffs a little bit bigger. But if you would like any free patterns, just go to free patterns at simpleandsensational.com.